Right. And next up, we have my good friend, my neighbor in the office next to me, but also my neighbor down the actual street from me, Coach Devin Young. Devin, for those that don't know him, you should. You're missing out. Exceptional human being, exceptional practitioner. I've heard him give, a couple different renditions of this talk a couple times with our staff and other people. And it's really good stuff. And it's really nice, selfishly for me, when I have a team around me that we teach each other a lot of things, and Devin really helps lead the front on that for us. So excited to dive into this. Devin, you should be good to rock and roll and share whenever you're ready, man.
All right, let me pull this up real quick. Oh, I got too many things. How do I get rid of? How do I get to full screen? There it is. All right, cool. We good, Aaron?
We're beautiful.
All right. So, everyone, I'm sure if you followed me on social media, you've heard me talk. Like, I'm really down this big idea of Omni Contraction. And as Aaron has talked about previously, of me going over this multiple times, I was literally, since I got in here, I think around 8, I got in here to try to start listening to something. I've been tinkering with this presentation ever since. Aaron probably isn't going to be happy when I say this, but recently was just on a vacation and then ended up yesterday spending 6 hours with Bill Knowles up at his spot in Wayne's, PA. So made it a vacation slash continuing ed trip. But again, now has my mind thinking of, oh my God, this is wrong, that's wrong. How am I changing this? So it's interesting the presentation I gave on this at Youngstown State. I'm going to call this version 2 because it's going to be different, right? There's different slides, there's some different information. I'm going to talk about it in different ways as this is continually growing for myself. So, Aaron was kind words for me. I've got some kind words first. I stand on the shoulders of giants. So, the Pitt staff here, again, I can't thank Aaron and Coach Mock when she hired me at the time. You are truly the person you spend around the most time with, and the staff here has honestly been the reason I've been able to grow as a practitioner, grow as a person through resources, support, bouncing ideas off people. Like it really has allowed me to grow into the coach I am now. When I think about 5 years ago, when I was at Bridgewater, really started to get into Omni Contraction and to where I'm at now. I mean, it's night and day difference. I need to apologize to the football athletes who I ran a phase through because it wasn't bad training, but it wasn't nearly to the extent of where it is now. And everywhere I've been past, UMass Lowell from my first internship to all my jobs, internships, like everyone has had a piece of my career that has made me take a right, made me take a left turn, and really kind of put me to where I am. I got to give credit to my wife, Alyssa. Again, we went on a vacation and I had her drop me off 45 minutes away and said, come back in 6 hours. So, kind of just thankful for her from all the Amazon boxes that come in for books to the obscene amount of money I spend on continuing ed. And then finally, my parents. I think it's no shock if you're in strength and conditioning, it's hard to tell your parents, hey, I'm moving to Eastern Michigan. It's like sick, how much money you're going to make? Like nothing. I'm doing this for free. So just being supportive in just me chasing this dream, chasing this goal, and putting me in a position to where I'm now at Pitt, to where again, I can't thank the staff here enough and Coach Mock for hiring me, and it's been the best opportunity I've ever had. So, little thank you. So, some actionable takeaways. If you don't know what Omni Contraction is, you will know at the end of this presentation. I'm going to give you how I build my off-season training, right? And how I take this systems approach to make it flexible. And we'll talk a little bit more about systems and why I think they're so important in terms of progression between year to year, athlete to athlete, team to team, but also trying to see like, does this work? Is my training making an impact on my athletes, whether that's in the weight room, whether that is transferring to on the field, and is it continuing to help the athletes year after year? It's not hard if we get a freshman class in. This past year for myself, I had 12 plus freshmen. It's not hard for me to say, oh my God, this training's amazing, where low training age hasn't maybe been in a structured system of training to see improvements, right? But am I seeing it with my juniors, with my seniors as we're going through? So, first thing first, what is Omni Contraction? I got brought into this through Alan Bishop. Actually, was the first person I ever saw it. At the time, I was heavily influenced by Cal Dietz and the triphasic model. I'm sure if you're a strength coach, you've read his book, you've implemented his training. Awesome way to get your kids strong, can really improve athleticism overall. But for me, there was something I thought was missing, right? Or that idea of how do we keep getting better? So came across Omni Contraction, and I did not invent it. It's Christian Thibodeau's work. I highly recommend reading. I think it's the Black Book of Secrets. I'm looking at my books right now for where he really kind of introduces it, going through it. So Cal Dietz's version, 2 to 3 weeks specific eccentric, 2 to 3 weeks isometric, then moving into your speed block. Love it. It's awesome. But if we think about how sport is played, there's never a time where all three muscle contractions are not being used. So why don't we train it that way? Why am I taking, say, 6 to 8 weeks removed from my eccentric work in Cal's version before I touch it again? It seems lost to me. So now understanding how this works, every day has a specific contraction. In the traditional sense, Monday's eccentric, Wednesday's isometric, Friday's concentric. And we can talk about later how I've manipulated this based on my teams, practice schedules, days I have, but this is kind of like your traditional model. And then the methods are trained for me based on certain things. The phase of training we're in, I'm going to use specific contractions, whether that's yielding, overcoming, maybe using a flywheel. What is my training goal? What am I trying to get out of this 3, 4, 6 weeks of training? Also, my athlete's training age, which is something where I'm going to throw a lot of audibles in later after talking with Bill, of kind of thinking of, all right, from my freshmen, my seniors, am I doing the best I can for them? Keeping them on a more structured team style training versus individualizing a little more. And then our baseline of testing, which has evolved for me massively in the last 3 years, of how are we getting the most information about our athletes coming in? What are their strengths? What are their weaknesses? What are they deficient in? To make sure that we can progress their training and put them in the best situation to be available and effective in their sport. So we talked about this a little bit. Why Omni? Again, I love the idea of training the contractions within their own day, right? I'm never removed more than 6 days from touching an eccentric, isometric, or concentric. The sport is played that way, so we need to train it. One thing I will say on Y Omni is that it is a perfect off-season program. I would not and haven't really implemented much of it in my in-season. While I have sprinkled variations of it in season, it is, for what I have found, the best way to go with an off-season because you can periodize it so well to your team's practices, to events they're doing. I also work track and field. A lot of the talk here will be around softball, but I've also used it with track. So it's an easy way to manipulate to make sure that we're hitting the same qualities at practice as we are in the weight room. It allows us to also to increase mastery phase to phase. So as we'll go through some of my examples of my training and kind of now as I'm building this out, going on to year 5 of it, seeing my mistakes, being able to use the same exercise phase instead of having to change so much. We're changing the contraction, we're changing the way we're training that exercise. We now create mastery through that movement. So again, we might be doing a yielding split squat into a safety bar split squat into a safety bar overcoming, right? We're able to get weeks and months of that same pattern in versus switching it every 3 or 4 weeks, and the kids never really master the movements that we're trying to do. One of the contractions is always going to be the weakest link, so why not train it? Make sure that if we are eccentrically deficient, we're training the eccentrics. If we're isometrically deficient, we're training that, and we have this within a system that builds upon as we're going through. So for the progressions as we're going through, I look at this and I use the terms accumulation, intensification, realization. I don't treat them per se as block style. There is a little bit of concurrent in how I train and how I'm doing stuff. But for me, these nomenclatures make sense to me of kind of what is the big rock we're trying to get through, right? Accumulation, I'm trying to get tissue adaptations. I'm trying to prepare the muscles and tendons and the nervous system for our next more intense phase of training. Our intensification phase, again, we're looking at maximum strength. We're looking at maximum peak force as we're going through. And as we dip into our realization phase, now we're moving to more high velocity training. Speed is going to become more the focus and putting our athletes in more advantageous positions to either retest that we're going through in the fall or putting them in better positions for when they're playing their sport. So what matters for sport? And I know when I first presented this, me and Aaron kind of had a conversation about this slide. But when I'm thinking of what sport is, I'm starting to become more holistic in the way I look at sport, right? Like we have strength, we have flexibility, we have coordination, we have balance. We have all these aspects that are going to help us to be better at sport, right? If I lack coordination, I'm not going to be able to express that through strength because I can't move through a squat. I can't move through a deadlift because I don't have the coordination, right? If my endurance is low, I'm not going to be able to recover set by set, rep by rep, or even day by day of training to then build upon each other. So within the Omni Contraction and the way I program and kind of even now more information from different things I've looked at from my warm-ups to how I prep my athletes to how we dose in our speed and conditioning, these aspects are always kind of in the back of my mind of like, all right, is one building upon another? Are we jumping too far ahead to before we've even mastered coordination and now we're trying to do strength, right? Do we have a base level of capacity before now we're trying to touch speed going through? So, little background for you guys. Contraction methods that I have used, and these are not all of them. These are just ones that have I've used, whether we're talking about eccentric, isometric, concentric. We have our extending, we have our max, which for me would kind of be that 85 to 95% of one rep max. Our super max would be 105 and above. Our 2-to-1 methods, flywheels, long duration ISOs, which when I'm speaking of long duration ISOs, I'm kind of having a starting point around like 2 minutes and then building up to 4, potentially 5 minutes. I've never gotten an athlete or someone to a 5 minute long duration ISO. We've kind of capped it in the past around like 3.5 minutes. Yielding isometrics, overcoming isometrics, functional isometronics, statodynamic, which is Thibodeau's version of like either pre ISOs before reps, post ISOs after reps, or intra rep ISOs as we're going through. Another aspect that we could add into here would be isokinetics, being here as I'm staring out into our gorgeous new weight room and having a couple 1080s, being able to actually use isokinetics is something that as I'm planning in my intensification phase, diving more into as we're going through. For our concentric normal reps, I always tell our athletes on our concentric day, we're just normal lifting. There's no tempo, there's no pause. I want you to have some control, but it's your normal, typical lifting. Pure concentrics, which for me would be any kind of pin work, block work you're doing from, we're really just expressing movement through that concentric piece, and then any kind of med ball work and then sled work that we can be using. So here's just again some demos of things I've used in the past for these eccentric methods, some overloaded weight releasers, some flywheels. I had to put my garage gym in just because I'm super proud of it and just have really the reason Aaron's my neighbor down the street is because I bought this house and mainly reason was for the garage. We have some overloaded eccentrics in our chins and then some extended eccentrics as we're going through. For our ISOs, we have our yielding, we have some 3 positions, we have some overcoming, and then we have some functional isometrics. Now, within each one of these positions, as we're going through them, we need to look at why are we doing them, right? So for our yielding isometrics, I'm looking at capacity. I'm looking at tendon health. I'm looking at fascial changes of actually trying to get the muscle to change length as we're going through. If you've dove into any of the FRC stuff, always it's like a 2 minute hold in the positions. That's kind of where that mindset is for that 2 minutes of isometric is actually trying to then get the fascial to change as we're going through. Concentric methods, again, we've got our pin work, we've got our block starts, and then traditional RDLs on the backside going through this. So we now understand, okay, each day is going to have its specific contraction that we're doing. We can use different exercises to build out each phase that we're doing. But when I'm building my system of training, controlling the variables and progression of training for me is super important. And I think some people that do an awesome job of building a system is Mike Boyle, Cal Dietz, and then my mentor, Ben Prentice, where a lot of this information is going to come from. But again, if you've ever been to Cal's weight room and his methods of triphasic, his room is built around his system. You go to Mike Boyle, it's an assembly line, right? He's sometimes, I think in the summertime, he might be on like 15-minute increments between coming in, their warm up, their med balls, their speed session. It flows so well. My mentor, Ben, I mean, every time I go up to his facility, something has changed, right? If he's changing this in his program, he is now changing this in the layout, flow, equipment in his weight room. All these people are awesome. For me, I share a weight room with 5 other people on our Olympic staff. So if I go to Aaron and be like, hey, man, I'm really thinking that we need 7 of the Sorinex flywheel rigs. He might shake his head and say, yeah, they're awesome, but we don't have X amount of money to do it. Or no one else uses flywheels to the extent you do. So it's not going to kind of benefit everyone. So within for me of building a system, my system has to be adaptable to whether I am training here at Pitt, if I'm going on the road with one of my teams and we're going to another weight room, how am I able to change, manipulate, or is it broad enough that this system is kind of accessible and usable in any place as we need to go? One thing that has changed recently for me that I've added to this is if you guys haven't read Tim Karen's book, Training Team Sports, I highly recommend it. But understanding that the system needs to be built on principles, and he dives into these 6 or 7 principles down below. The next slide will give you guys definitions of them. But one thing he mentions in the book to me that really kind of hit home is that principles are true. No matter what we're doing, these principles will be true. Which, in terms of training, why am I picking my exercises? Why am I picking my certain tempos? Why am I doing this specific range of motion? Like, does it fall into these principles? Does it then affect how my athletes are training to progress them from phase to phase? And then I'll leave this up for a second. I'm not going to read every one of these, but each one of these principles comes from these books. And it really hit home for me on kind of looking at, all right, when I'm building out my annual plan, when I'm building my phase of training, like, am I hitting every one of these? Does it bleed in to the next one as we're going through? So, off-season blueprint. I want to, before we dive into this, one thing I want to say is my off season for both of my teams, softball and track, is usually May or June through July. It's during that summertime, right? There's no softball. Yes, some of them are going to be playing summer ball or different things. Track, for the most part, I've got a couple kids competing internationally or U20s, but for the most part, June through August is my off season where the weight room strength conditioning is the main focus. On the flip side of that, it's also the time where all my athletes are away from me. So within this blueprint, I'm now also going to use it in the fall, which is technically still off season for us, even though track goes to 20 hours early, softball's got fall ball. It's still kind of my big stretch of time where I get to train my team when they're all here under my supervision, not training remotely off of Team Builder or going to one of their personal trainers or strength and conditioning coaches wherever they are and maybe adopting some of what I'm doing as we're going through. But in a perfect scenario, this offseason blueprint, GPP training, I'm looking at 6 to 8 weeks. We're restoring tissue, correcting movements, increasing range of motion, and increasing aerobic capacity. During my accumulation block, again, could be 4, could be 6 weeks, increasing work capacity. This might have some hypertrophy in it. This is where maybe we're getting more anaerobic capacity, and then not increasing, introducing plyometrics, definitely being on the more extensive side. My intensification phase is going to be anywhere between 3 to 4 weeks. Max strength, anaerobic power, intensive plyometrics. Realization is where now we're getting power, we're getting speed, we're maybe doing some contrast work. And then the peaking asterisk with it, softball. There's really no peaking for softball. We might this past year got into ACC playoffs. Cool. We're trying to be our fastest, strongest at the time. We were just about to beat Virginia, which would then put us to the next round. It's one of those things where like you're never really sure when your season is going to end, so trying to peak them is very hard. On the flip side of that, for track, I know when ACCs are. I know who's going to make it to regionals. I know who's going to be at nationals. It's a little bit easier to peak them as we're going through. And that's going to be about 8 days, 2 weeks of contrast work roughly, and then we'll be doing something called Surf the Curve, which is a concept I stole from Ben on how we kind of create this complex slash contrast work in the weight room to make sure that we're hitting every point of the force velocity curve going through. So Here's an example, and again, if you followed me on social media, you've probably seen it before of the 2025-2026 softball annual plan. We have our summer, we have our off season. So again, I just broke down for you kind of how does that off season plan look. But again, I work in the real world of sports. Last year, we started our fall ball for softball on September 8th. So that's the second week of, well, technically third week of school, but after our first week of training. They come in on the 25th. We do our baseline testing. We kind of have an intro week that I like to have, even with my athletes that were returning. For my freshmen, I want to make sure that we're putting them in the best position to be successful. What did you do in the summer? Did you do something? Did you do nothing? Did you recently hurt yourself that we found from our baseline testing that we need to adjust as we're going through? But as soon as we kind of, not even through that, we're starting our fall ball roughly around the 8th. So this is where things are going to change from the perfect scenario layout to how I actually do things to kind of give you guys a better idea of like building your system. One thing that I've done in the last 3 years that has been super helpful for me for planning out my training, I have my annual plan. It's pretty, it's colorful, it gives you a good 1,000 foot view of what we're doing for going to be doing. But this phase training qualities is really for me making sure, all right, am I programming? Am I hitting what I need to do? Are what we're doing in our intro week, does it build to make us successful during our accumulation block? Are we doing everything we need to be doing in our accumulation block to make sure we can be where we need to be in our intensification block, and so on? I really like it. It's super simple for me to make sure that we're hitting everything within our annual plan that might be a little bit different. This really gives me a clear layout and something that I've been using for the last 3 years. All right, so GPP phase, we talked about this. We're going to be anywhere between 4 to 6 weeks, 3 to 5 times a week. One thing that most recently, and again, after yesterday talking with Bill, really has my mind spinning is one, the GPP phase is our most important phase, which I also think is overlooked. And this is also talking to myself. I'm calling the kettle black on this one. Why is GPP so important, right? Well, if we want to get into higher strength, we want to get into more power movements, but we don't have that baseline of foundation, whether that's capacity, whether that's range of motion, we're only setting our athletes up for failure on the back end. Also, in the sports that I work with, track and field, softball, a lot of my kids come in that are underdeveloped, right? They don't have a lot big training age. Even if they're 1 or 2 years training age, they don't really have a base that I would think is big enough to really kind of want to be now more into, say, special strength or getting into these more technical aspects. So how are we going to kind of make sure this GPP phase is being used to make sure we're putting them in the best position? Well, for one, what is the testing we're doing? Over the last 3 years, me and my athletic trainer have done a really good job of building out our testing to make sure, like, are we looking at strength? Are we looking at asymmetries? Are we looking at mobilities? Are we asking them what their past injury histories are? I mean, the biggest predictor of new injuries is past injuries. We use this pre-fall, post-fall, pre-season, and then I try to also get another one at the end of the season just so that way I can use that to guide my programming throughout the summer. Now, for me, how I make my GPP phase, we break it up into long duration ISOs, three position ISOs. This will run anywhere between 2 to 3 weeks. Day one is going to be long duration ISOs. Day two is going to be three position ISOs. Day three is going to be another long duration ISOs, trying to get out of that sagittal plane, trying to be more frontal, more transverse, or I will call it more like our multi-directional day as we're going through. From there, we dive into extended eccentrics. Each one of the days is going to have specific exercises, specific time under tension that we're trying to go through that will run for 2 to 3 weeks. Also, at the same time, we're looking at our aerobic capacity at this for track and softball. This is mostly done on the bike. I would love to get them into the pool as much as I could. Again, they're not with me, so it's hard to prescribe, hey, I need you to go find a pool and do this circuit, this certain workout in the pool because it's going to be great for you. Examples. So this is my most recent summer long duration ISO phase, and I'll explain kind of how things have changed in this. This is a rising junior on the softball team who is a Pittsburgh native, so she has been able to train with me 3 years now in the summertime, hence why her split squats are starting off at 3 minutes, 3:30, and then trying to build to those 4 minutes. She's built over the years a big capacity to where now she can handle these longer times under tension as we're going through. Push up ISO, glute bridges, ring rows. We kind of look at a full body as we're going through. One thing that I'm starting to change within my idea of this long duration ISOs is not always having to be within one stretch, right? So split squats, yes, I want us to kind of be in that position. I want us to try to accumulate that entire time in one set. On our push-ups, though, upper bodies are weaker, especially if we're talking about female athletes versus male athletes, or even some of my male athletes aren't that great upper body strength wise. So instead of having, all right, let's get 2 minutes, we want to be in about a 90, maybe even a deep range position. I have seen over time those positions become deeper. We get more back arching. We basically turn it into shit. It's no longer a good position. And the idea of the long duration ISOs is to own specific positions over the time, right? So now if I'm rounding forward, if I'm kind of getting into more of a cobra, right? If I end up basically now in a push-up position and my thumbs are past my shoulder, the position is no longer what we need to be in. So we're not training the muscles, the ranges, the connective tissue how we want to. So trimming that down, getting it a little bit shorter as we're going through. Here's an example of some in season, right? So now we get into the fall, and I've got my upperclassmen, I've got my freshmen going through. We're about to start fall ball in a week. How am I going to get everything I need in? So I've kind of broken it up to where now instead of day one being long duration ISOs, we're kind of going to now do a little bit more of an quote unquote sub max eccentric work. We're going to get some clean work in. We're going to get some pull variations in. I do use Olympic lifting in my programming with my athletes, so this is a way that we can kind of get it in, pairing it up with our um, eccentric work on the back end. Day two becomes our three position ISO day. So now we did eccentrics. Now we're moving into ISOs, three position pauses as we're going through. Day three, we're going to go back to an eccentric day. Time under tension drops off a little bit. We're still able to work on some Olympic lifts as we're going through. And then finally, our fourth day is going to be our long duration ISO day. The reason why in season I kind of take this approach is one time, where do we need to be and what's coming up, right? I know we have fall ball coming up. So how do I kind of condense this idea of my isometric eccentric day coming in? Did my athletes do anything over the summer? Making sure that I'm kind of filling that bucket a little bit and also using this time to assess where we're at. I have found though that the long duration ISO, once we get into fall ball or fall, stressors are through the roof anyways. Kids now are first time college kids, first time moving away from home, their school, they're regular people, right? They have this whole college experience, which is going to add stress to them. I have found the long duration ISO day has been a great way to help aid in recovery, making my athletes feel fresher, moving back into Monday of our next week. As we can see, this is a past workout that we've done before. Even though in this one, I'm trying to see if I can find my mouse, it's not around. The bench push up ISO, even though now we are kind of in a more like elevated position, technically being in a stronger position, I would not have this starting off at a minute and 30. This would be something that I'm breaking it down into smaller pieces. Even my rows, maybe breaking them down into smaller pieces as we're going through and accumulating that time of over 3, 4, 5 sets. So our accumulation block, we're looking at 4 to 6 weeks. We're training anywhere between 3 to 5 times a week. We're building work capacity. We're looking at increasing maybe some hypertrophy, some tissue prep. This is technically now our first phase of Omni Contraction, right? So that GPP phase building in is not technically what I would consider Omni Contraction. It is the prerequisite to get us ready to get into our Omni Contraction. During this accumulation block, this is also where I've in the past started training our sprints, more on feet conditioning that we're going through with this. Nope, sorry, I didn't know clicking it would make the video go. It's okay. We'll let it ride for a little bit. That's one rep. All right, we'll move on. All right. So during this phase, we're going to be using extended eccentrics, a 2-to-1 method. Again, in our new weight room now, I think we have, is it eight? I'm looking at the back end, eight flywheels on the back of our rack. So pushing, pulling, core, I have a lot more usage of our flywheel now, at least for some upper body, some rowing, even some laying hamstring, prone hamstring, quad work that we can go through. For our ISOs, we're going yielding isometrics. We're going to be doing some statodynamic, and then our traditional lifts are just going to be our basic accumulation block. I love eights and sixes, trying to add more sets versus reps as we're going through, just trying to keep the quality a little bit higher as we're going through this. Here is a practical summer workout. So I'm not going to dive through everything here. You guys are going to get the recordings for this. You can pause it, look through this. I'm pretty sure I probably posted it on my social media, but kind of how are we taking this eccentric day? What are we going to bucket? What are we going to make sure is important that we're building off going through? One thing I will talk about with this, if we look at like the barbell back squats or even our bench press, moving forward, one thing I've changed for this current summer is instead of increasing intensity as we're going through, intensity has increased, but we also are dropping off time under tension. So I think for this year, we were at an 8, 6, 5, and then we might have had a deload week, which might have totally taken out the tempos or dropped it down. So instead of keeping it 10 seconds, 10 seconds, 10 seconds, getting a little bit heavier as we're going through, we're basically going to increase intensity and drop down that time under tension as we're going forward. Another example of our yielding ISO, trap bars are using a statodynamic method. We've got 2 inches above the ground, pause at the knee, so we're getting two ISOs in it as we're going through. And then our concentric day, we're looking at clean pulls from blocks and really just looking at a traditional lift, dumbbell split squats, ring rows. No tempo on these days and just trying to build volume as we're going from week 4, 5, 6, and 7. Here's an example of if we had a fourth day, right? So throughout the fall softball, normally I have them through 4 days. So if I'm looking at an eccentric day, an isometric day, a concentric day, I might save that day four for what I would call supplemental, maybe a bodybuilding day based on our FMS screen, some force plate readings. Maybe now this becomes a day that's a lot more individualized for our athletes based on what they need to work on going through. So intensification block. So 3 to 4 weeks, increase in maximum strength. We're looking at peak force, increase in RFD. The asterisk with with the RFD is because it's not my primary focus. I am more looking at during this phase really trying to increase peak force. So that way in our later phases, we now have a higher threshold for peak force to then train that to move it faster as we're going through. During our intensification phase, though, is really for me we're now probably around October-ish. A lot of things change. Track enters 20 hours. So now instead of their 8 hours where it's basically 4 and 4 is how we divvy it up, they're entering their 20 hours. So now training volume, practice volume is through the roof. Also during one of our highest stress points of training in the weight room. Softball is on the back end of fall ball. So now they've gone through anywhere between 4 to maybe 6 games on the weekends. We usually always play double headers. So now you're talking about 14, 15, maybe even 16 innings, depending on the time we have. Dosage here matters so much. I have more often than not on my intensification blocks really tried to trim overall exercise volume, trying to add any kind of supplemental work in, whether that's my B2, my B3, mainly just to add rest to my athletes to make sure that they can recover set from set, rep to rep as we're going through. So during this time, we're looking at maximum eccentrics, maybe even supermax eccentrics as we're going through. We're going to be getting into overcoming isometrics, possibly using some isokinetics, having 5, 10, 80s here now, being able to attach them to the racks. Again, my mind has just been spinning of how do we utilize this to really benefit ourselves, benefit the athletes using this isokinetic. We'll start getting into more pin work and more advantageous positions as we're going through. So here's a softball example of kind of how we've broken this down. Looking at basically increasing intensity, volumes dropping off as we're going through. As you can see from previous sheets, if you guys zoom back on this or not reverse back, but go back in the recording to look at previous sheets, you'll definitely see that the exercise selection like trims off. The volume drastically drops off as we're going through. Also, during this time, my time might be shortened up a little bit to now. We want to get to practice a little bit earlier. The weather's getting a little bit worse here in Pittsburgh. Sometimes we have Octobers that are still 70 degrees. Sometimes we're in a foot of snow. It just depends what we get here in Pittsburgh as we're going through. Our overcoming ISO day, this has kind of been the first example. And if you guys look on my Instagram, you can actually see, I think, clips of this as we're going through of basically taking a full day of training and prioritizing overcoming isometrics. So outside of the speed session we did prior to the lift in our indoor facility, everything we're doing now here is overcoming. Whether we're using straps, we're using the racks, everything is all about max effort in advantageous positions as we're going through. Not weirdly enough, but this was my softball's favorite day of lifting. Now, there's two things why. One, again, overall stress on the body is low. There's going to be a high CNS drive, but not a lot of metabolic, not disruptions, the word I'm looking for, but like metabolic stress on the body. They love this day. Second thing they love this day, some of the athletes could easily make a face squeeze real hard, but maybe they're only giving you 20, 30% in. So while this day was one of my athletes' favorites, it's also one of the days looking back on how I kind of programmed this out. Is there better ways to set this up to make sure I am getting the intent I want out of my athletes? Our concentric day, pretty self total body lift day. Nothing too crazy on that as we're going through with our pin squats. Biggest thing we allowed here was just for some open sets going through. All right, our realization phase. 2 to 4 weeks, maybe 2 to 3 times a week. We're thinking about RFD, we're thinking about speed, and we're thinking about training positions closest to sport or closest to what we're going to retest. We want high output with limited fatigue. And this is going to be building to our end of fall testing. The reason there's an asterisk there is because when I'm thinking of where do I want to be my athlete's best, I want to be towards the end of the season. I want to be around April and May for softball. So for me, trying to have this realization phase and kind of build them up, I kind of tend to not think it's the best because yes, I want them to be stronger. I want them to be more powerful. I want the off-season training that we do here in the fall to matter and show results. But at the same time, I would rather keep building as we're going throughout Christmas and through our preseason, and then really kind of make sure that we're hitting this realization phase later on as we're going through. But for the context of this presentation and what I've done in the past, our realization phase is kind of building towards that end of season testing. Fast eccentrics, flywheels. Again, we could be using flywheels for here. We're going to be using small wheels here, really trying to get speed, functional isometrics, joint specific isometrics. Again, looking at lockouts and block work on our Olympic lifts, and then contrast work on our speed days, which I think I have an example for our track as we're going through, trying to make sure if it's a more speed day in their practice, it's going to be a speed day in the weight room. So, example of kind of like our off-season day eccentric, we're thinking trap bar jumps, we're thinking fast down, fast up, our Hatfield split squats, using bands for that accommodating resistance, trying to increase speed on the way down and allowing our athletes to actually accelerate through the bar with the bands. Again, not a lot of exercises here, more rest, not a lot of supersets, really trying to make the main thing here as we're going through. ISO day. So this is an example of my jumpers of kind of how we're doing our overcoming. So within this one, week by week, as we're going through, we're changing positions. We're going from bottom to mid to top, putting max effort into the bar. The overcoming supinated chin-ups was a couple slides back. You saw as we set up the straps, trying to then get that end range. Overcoming ISO chin-up through. All right, so battery of testing, right? So we went through the realization. I gave you guys examples. If you've seen all my stuff, I provide sheets and sheets, examples, examples. So now within this system of training, testing is what's going to be one of the most important things, right? If I just assume my athletes are strong, if I assume that they're FMS, they move well, I'm putting myself in a disadvantage, right? So over the years, I've kind of built out bucketing systems of how we put our athletes in. So through our FMS, right? If we lack that overhead squat mobility, we lack dorsiflexion in our passive range testing. Those are going to be my low-hanging fruits that I want to attack during that GPP phase to make sure that as we get into our accumulation, our intensification phase, we are now in better positions, right? We can produce more force. I'm not having a dropped arch in my foot, which is now not allowing me to gain the range of motion ankle I need to where now I can't perform my back squats or my jumps, my plyos, anything, or even my sprinting for that matter. So testing for me really has become something that has built out over the years. I've found norms for what we're looking for, whether that's shoulder health, whether that's our CMJ for our ISO belt, and kind of now, all right, what do our top athletes look like? What do our mid-range athletes look like? What do our bottom athletes look like? And how do I then bucket them, program for them to make sure that they're in the best position to keep moving forward? So, we talked about bucketing, individualization. I always like to go after low-hanging fruit. For me, that might be, hey, everyone is going to run their GPP phase. Let's see how that 4 to 6 weeks goes, 3 weeks goes, depending on how long it is. What progress can we make? Bucketing the athletes based off of needs, like I just said. What is their FMS? What is their mobility restrictions? What does their CMJ look like? How do we then put them in the right buckets to be successful with the mindset of low hanging fruit as we're going through? If KPIs are increasing, training's working. I've really taken a mindset of we train, we test to get results, right? And our training is testing. Anytime my girls sprint in softball, we're timing them. We jump on the force plates 1 to 2 times a week. Right now, we just also got perch in our weight room here. So now using VBT is going to be a high priority of looking at strength of every 3 to 4 weeks. Are we throwing in some heavy doubles, heavy triples? Like, what are the trends saying in terms of strength as we're going through? And then don't progress too fast. I think this is something I added to the slide from the first time I presented on this topic is yes, I have guidelines of 3 to 4 weeks, 2 to 4 weeks, but you have to use your coaching eye. You have to know your athletes. You have to have these open dialogue with athletic training, PT, if someone's seeing them, even your coaching staff, right? What are they seeing at practice? I'm super fortunate that softball starts so early that coaches get eyes on them to be like, ooh, so and so's not moving great, or we're asking her to execute this way and she just physically can't. All right, well, how can I aid them in the weight room with maybe that's offering extra mobility or an extra recovery day, or is the exercises I'm giving them within their mobility during the weight room session actually helping them, or am I just being very generalist going through? So, one thing I've done, especially this summer with a couple of my kids that are sticking around, is some of them are on an intensification phase. Some of them are now just entering their accumulation phase because I'm prolonging maybe what they need. Maybe we need to spend a little bit longer in a GPP phase before moving into our first accumulation block. So don't progress too fast. And I know that's easier said than done, especially if you're in the college setting where I only have 15 weeks. Maybe your coaches are really dead set on your testing numbers to where they want to see where we got in the fall, where are you now at the end of fall or at the beginning of spring. But does that really matter if you're putting the athlete in compromised positions or advancing training too much to where just keeping them simple would make the progress in the long run? So using metrics, again, I'm fortunate here at Pitt to where it's force plates, perch now, 1080s, timing gates to really see, all right, is the training we're doing making a difference? So these are just some snapshots of a couple of the key metrics I look at on our force plates to see if training is going in the right direction. And obviously anyone who's used force plates knows not every jump is a new PR, is a new this. I heavily look at trend lines, right? Where are we at the beginning of fall? Where are we at towards the end of the season, right? Now, as we can see through here, somehow through the end of January, throughout February, crazy results to then a little bit of a drop off, but still a higher output, higher performances than when we were coming in. Except for our time to take off was just phenomenal at the end of our spring season as we're going through. Same thing for like our shoulder testing, right? Looking at our ASH tests as we're going through, like, is training making a difference, right? It's so easy for us to coaches to say, well, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're adding this mobility in, it's making a difference. Is it? How do you know you're making changes if you're not tracking stuff? And that can be as simple as looking at, all right, they did 5 reps at this weight last week. Now they're doing 6 reps if you really have no technology whatsoever, right? Maybe it is as simple as like, okay, you have a just jump mat. I'm writing their numbers down every week. Like, you don't have to have all the tech in the world. It is nice. It's super helpful. Thank you, Aaron, for making sure that we can track and build as we're going through. So, writing in pencil, not in pen. And the picture here, I always got asked why this picture is here because if we think of sports, if we think of strength and conditioning, if we think of anything in college athletics, it is chaotic. Things change at a drop of a dime. Practices move from an hour to an hour and a half now, only have 30 minutes. Principles are the foundation. They are tried and true. We talked about that already. Highly recommend Tim's book. If those principles are in place and you are following those principles, your program will be successful. Exercises slash programs, um, one are written in pencil, not in pen. We can easily erase them, right? Exercises are plug and play. I should be able to take my system if I know the adaptation I'm trying to create, if I know why we're doing A, B, and C on this day. You could take me into the weight room I am now, into our campus rec center, or taking me to another university, and I should be able to get the same adaptation, the same training stimulus I want to, even though I might have to completely change the exercises I'm using. We talked about this a couple seconds ago, but again, schedules, times, locations change. How does your program adjust and how does it alter based on what you need? And then when shit hits the fan, what do you do? And again, college athletics, it's been many of times where track team lift starts at 2:45, kids roll in at 3 o'clock, but they've got class at 3:30. Like, how do I make sure that we're still getting in what we need to get in through a training aspect? Like, am I able to adapt this model? Am I able to adapt my system to whatever comes at me? Ways I stay flexible is one, I have some of my non-negotiables. Like if it's a sprint day and times get messed up or teams show up late, I'm going to make sure I get my sprinting in maybe before even my main strength movement or some of my accessories, right? I have my non-negotiables that I'm going to make sure we get in. What is going to drive adaptation? Cut the fluff. As you saw through my intensification and my realization, it's really a lot of meat and potatoes. It is the main things that we were trying to get done, not adding a lot of fluff into it because I'd rather have my athletes have more rest, more time to recover to then hit that safety bar split squat with full effort, full intent versus now adding two, three other things that might be getting in using my KPIs to track post to pre and post testing and audit. I jump my kids every week. I try to ISO belt them, if not all of them, a good handful of them at the end of every phase to kind of see, okay, what does the bell curve look like for the majority of my team? Are we increasing force? Are we decreasing time to peak force? What is happening so that way I can pivot as we're going forward? And then finally, the last one that I'm going to touch on here is be on the floor problem solver. I tell our interns or people that call me or reach out to me all the time, we are strength and conditioning coaches, but 90% of the time, as any of you on this call or anyone listening knows, you are a problem solver. You can have the best annual plan, you can have the best template, you can have the best program that's going to go forward, and something's going to happen during the session, pre, post, or during, to where now you have to make a complete change 180 and still make it happen. So thank you guys for listening to me ramble for the last 53 minutes. I appreciate you letting my voice and brain just kind of go. If you have any more questions, my email, my cell phone number, my Instagram handle's on there. My cell phone is on there because I am terrible at answering emails. So if you shoot me a phone call or a text, you're more likely to get an answer from me in a reasonable time versus 3 to 4 weeks now when I actually check my email. And before I finish up, Aaron, thank you again for giving me this opportunity to kind of talk a little bit more in depth of what I do than what I normally post about on Instagram. So I appreciate it, sir.
No, I appreciate you, Devin. That was awesome. I do have a little concern that that is your work phone number. So I don't know what's better, your email or your work phone, but I'll take your word for it.
Thank you.
Um, No, Devin, that's great stuff. And I don't think Devin, I mean, he's not going to give himself enough credit verbally, but I'll give him all the credit. As far as we were talking about earlier, Rick mentioned moving the needle versus swinging the pendulum, and like seeing how Devin's implemented this system over the last several years has moved the needle quite a lot. I know he put up a few, examples of, kind of his own self audit of like, is this type of training and are these methods working, and how he's validated that on his side, and that's only become more and more so each year. Um, Devin is as far as like what we strive as strength and conditioning coaches to be of like generating impact and actually proving results. He in the world of softball and track, those are two pretty difficult teams to work with at a lot of places. And Devin absolutely crushes it. And both coaching staffs absolutely adore him. And one, because of just who he is and how he is, but two, like it is no question that he will get those teams results. And I can attest to that. And I don't know how he can. Maybe I should like peer in on some of your sessions, Devin, when you're convincing them to start with like 2 minute ISOs, like during their summer block. And I don't know how you get them to do it, but they do it and they run through a brick wall for them. So, really good stuff. And I know a lot of people can get a lot of takeaways and look back through some of those charts. And just like everyone else on this call, Devin's a great resource, and he will get back to you. I give him shit for answering his work phone, but he will absolutely love to connect with you guys. Before we get to the next one, we do have a couple questions from Dre, so I'll read those out. So he says, here he asks, does your system that you implement at Pitt have any gray area that allows for some crossover between contraction types between days, or are you pretty strict with the system, assuming meaning like, when it's your iso phase and when it's your eccentric, or when it's those days, excuse me.
Of course, there's gray areas to where like when we get into in season's a great example. Like I will have more so isometric work on the front end of the week, but then I've also dabbled in adding some eccentric work on the back end, right? Like the reason I love this system and I love this style of training is because you're touching all the qualities. But if we get to in season and all of a sudden we remove one because it is going to be, may say, more promoting of DOMs and all that, well, what's the difference of then not doing it in your postseason, right? So finding ways to like blend them together, especially when you get to the in season and after talking with Anthony Cockrell a lot, like if you prep them appropriately, you dose the volume, intensity, and contractions in the right way. It shouldn't be to the point where if I sprinkle in, all right, we're going to do some dumbbell RFEs, 4 sets of 4 with a 2 second eccentric, it shouldn't destroy them to where now the next day they're like, oh my God, I can't walk. But are we still getting some of that benefit of that added contraction in? For the off season, I maybe didn't explain this great in the presentation as I was going through, but like with track's a great example, especially my jumpers. We have completely changed the model to where it's an iso concentric eccentric day, right? Like I've moved the days around, like I've played with it. All right, does this fit better? Eccentric, isometric, concentric? Is it concentric, isometric, eccentric? It really comes down to like what's our practice plan? What does the week look like? Is it softball in the fall and all of a sudden it's fall break on Thursday and I don't get them on that Friday? Okay, well, how do I kind of blend the days together a little bit to make sure I'm getting what I want out of them? Hopefully that
Yeah,
answered the question.
I think it did, and I think that you kind of touched on the next question, last one here, asking, going into season, making sure the quality is developed in the off season or maintained. Are you continuing that transfer realization phase into the beginning of season?
Yeah, so I'll basically their Christmas break will basically be another accumulation block, and I'll manipulate that a little bit because again, my kids don't stick around, so having someone do crazy overcoming ISOs or super slow eccentrics at a Planet Fitness might not be the best. So trying to make sure what's the goal for that accumulation block? What is going to prep me for when we come back coming in? But basically I'll repeat them. I get like 3 or 4 weeks of a preseason. That'll be more of our intensification block. We might move into like an intensification block 2 and then kind of bleed into more of like a realization and almost not really a peak, but trying to figure out, all right, how many wins do we have? Where are we sitting in postseason play? And trying to manipulate that the best I can just to make sure that we are jumping our highest, we're running our fastest, trying to be at our best towards that tail end of the season with softball. Track again is a little bit easier. We're going to be our strongest, fastest, most powerfulest at ACCs and then kind of manipulate as we go for whoever makes regionals and nationals.
Great. Love it, Devin. Well, thank you so much again. I'm going to try to let Donnie in here. Do you mind unsharing your screen,
Yep.
Devin?